Sci-fi and fantasy get lumped together a lot, and while they have distinct characteristics, they also blend really well together, which has created hundreds of subgenres. A while back, I made a video turning fantasy movies into sci-fi movies, and now I'm going to try the opposite. I'm going to take 4 sci-fi movies and make them fantasy movies. Mild spoilers ahead, so if you plan on watching any of these, please leave and go watch them now. Go! Dark City is a sci-fi dystopia about a man named John Murdoch waking up with no memories and learning that the city he lives in is a construct of the Strangers, a race of psychic aliens who can change the landscape at will and alter people's memories. They've been doing it to study humanity and try to figure out exactly what makes an individual an individual. Along the way, John Murdoch realizes that he has the same power to manipulate his environment as the Strangers, a power called tuning. And he spends the whole movie on the run from them until he manages to use tuning against the Strangers to defeat them, and to turn the whole city towards the sun, and add the nice beach from his implanted memories. In my fantasy remake of Dark City, I changed the name to Dark Kingdom. I know fantasy stories can also have cities, I just thought it sounded cool. Anyway, in Dark Kingdom, John Murdoch lives in an underground kingdom run by a creepy cult of wizards who have the same power to manipulate the world around them as the Strangers in Dark City, and they also manipulate people's memories, but the point is to keep everyone underground to exert control over them. They are not motivated by scientific curiosity, they just want to keep the status quo. In turning Dark City into a fantasy movie, I think the theme of finding out your whole life has been manufactured for you can still apply. It puts into question, what is true freedom? Are you free if you live your whole life in ignorance? Or should you always search for truth, even if the reality is that you're an insignificant piece of a system of power? And how can you attain true freedom once you've realized how the world really works? I suppose with this theme present in the fantasy remake, most of the changes would be aesthetic. I gave the wizard version of the Strangers long wizard robes with hoods, and I dressed John Murdoch in a traveling cloak. That with his curly hair ended up making him look like Frodo Baggins, but whatever. I wanted to give him a classic adventure fantasy look to contrast with the more neo-noir aesthetic of the original. I wanted to incorporate the design element of the spiral, which is present in the original, and I thought it'd be cool if it appeared on John's forehead when he uses his tuning power. And instead of turning the big spaceship towards the sun, John would break through the ceiling of the underground kingdom to let the sunlight in. The Andromeda Strain is a dry, speculative sci-fi story about a group of scientists studying an extraterrestrial life form that has caused a mysterious outbreak that killed an entire small town, save for an old man and a 6-month-old baby. It's slow and methodical, mostly consisting of lab tests with an exciting climax in which one of the scientists must race to stop the facility's self-destruct sequence. At first, I didn't know how to make this a fantasy story until it hit me. Change the extraterrestrial infection coming to Earth on a crashed satellite to a curse unearthed by dwarven miners. Then the people put up to the task of studying this phenomenon would be alchemists and wizards, and best of all, the characters investigating the mostly dead dwarven mining town can wear Plague Doctor outfits. I love Plague Doctor masks, they're so cool. Anyway, I didn't exactly incorporate all these elements into the poster because I'm bad at things, but I was inspired to emulate the minimalist approach of this poster of the original movie. But I also absolutely had to draw the Plague Doctor masks. I also included some medieval science equipment, most notably the cauldron, to show how these fantasy researchers would conduct their experiments. I also wanted to incorporate the crystalline shape of the virus in the original somehow, so I had some hexagonal shapes rising from the cauldron to convey the strangeness of the substance we're dealing with in this story. I had the idea of the curse coming from some mysterious green crystals the dwarves dug up that can kill you on contact, and at some point the alchemists and wizards figure out that the crystals have some sentient entity attached to them that is angry that its rest has been disturbed. And it's up to these fantasy nerds to figure out a way to appease this entity and to stop its affliction from spreading. Thematically, both the original and this fantasy remake both function as mystery stories, with the main characters putting the pieces together to solve a problem. And the Andromeda curse could end with a similar exciting climax, but instead of stopping the self-destruct sequence of the laboratory, perhaps it could be a confrontation of the supernatural entity. And after a struggle, maybe our main characters can successfully convince the entity to leave in peace and find a way to live with others. I suppose that makes it different from the original, wherein eradicating the virus is imperative to human and animal survival. In this version of the story, the point would be appealing to the sapience of a being that has a will to survive, and despite its destructive instincts, a right to live. This living thing would also have the capacity to choose peace instead of killing everything it touches. Repo, the genetic opera, is a goth rock opera, which is part coming-of-age story and part future dystopian nightmare. The movie is set in a world where, to combat widespread organ failures, a major corporation called GeneCo has implemented a system where people could get transplants on a payment plan. This not only gives rise to a society which advertises organ transplants as a glamorous commodity, but also allows violent repo men to stalk the streets, hunting down individuals who miss payments on their transplants and taking those organs out of them. The CEO of GeneCo, Roddy Largo, is dying and his 3 adult children vie for his inheritance. Meanwhile, there's a sick young girl named Shiloh who is sheltered by her father, who longs to explore the world outside, and eventually has to come to terms with the brutal reality that her father Nathan carries the burden of her mother's death, and he's also a repo man working for GeneCo under Roddy Largo's threat. I would describe this movie as not safe for normies. By that I mean it's strange, offbeat, very goth, and gory enough for someone that doesn't regularly watch gory movies. The music itself is also part of why most would find it off-putting. I personally thought it got better as the movie went along. That might have been me just getting used to it, but I think that after a while, the music found its rhythm and I ended up enjoying the ride. I was also surprised to see an all-star cast. We've got a good fella, a spy kid, and Paris Hilton? The original movie leans towards the fantastical in presentation, but it's undoubtedly a sci-fi movie due to its theme of the commodification of the human body. In my gothic horror fantasy remake, I've renamed it to Reaper, the flesh and blood opera. It would be set in the Victorian era, so we can keep the goth aesthetic but make it less modern. Shiloh in this version would also be a sickly girl kept inside by her father, who works as a reaper for a wealthy baron, rather than the CEO of a company. The only major character changes I'd make would be their costuming. I'd put them in more period-accurate clothing, which basically just means lots of ruffles, long puffy sleeves, and long skirts and fancy collars. Reapers would be tasked with hunting down those deemed to be undesirable, after which they will be harvested for their organs and sold to society's elites as expensive food items. I'd also change the Reaper outfit to look more Victorian, while still alluding to the outfit in the original. I put Nathan in a hood and a Victorian capelet, and I gave him these bright blue spectacles which allude to the light-up goggles he wears in the original. He also wields a scythe, which is the classic Grim Reaper weapon of choice. And it looks super cool too. Another change I made was to blind Mag, who in the original is an opera singer with artificial eyes which allow her to see and also project holographic images. In my fantasy remake, she's just blind, but she also has psychic powers, which would of course lead to witch accusations. I put her in a gothic Victorian hood and cape and gave her icy blue eyes, which, much like her original version, makes her pretty and spooky looking. Also in the original, there's a character called Grave Robber who harvests a chemical from dead bodies that functions as a recreational painkiller. I had to include him on the poster because I thought it'd be cool if this drug was a potion, so I drew him holding a flask of the bright blue chemical. A lot of these changes are purely cosmetic, and I did change the setting from the future to the past and changed organ transplantation to full-on cannibalism. But I think that between these two versions, the theme of human commodification remains consistent, and I'd have to make virtually no changes to the plot about Roddy Largo's children vying for the inheritance of his estate/company, nor the plot about Shiloh learning about her father's past and how the legacy of his mistakes is placed upon her through no fault of her own. I decided I couldn't complete this project without including a movie about space, so I picked Sunshine as my last sci-fi to fantasy conversion. Sunshine is about the second astronaut crew sent to the dying sun with a massive explosive device in order to reignite it and bring Earth out of its slow, icy death. As expected, many things go wrong along the way, from ship malfunctions, loss of oxygen supply, multiple incinerations, and attacks from a previously unseen madman. It's a desperate mission. The first expedition failed, and humanity only has one last shot to get the sun back to normal, or everyone is going to die. What I like about the movie is its use of light and sound to portray the sheer power of the sun. Even in its weakened state, staring at it too long doesn't just do physical damage, it can alter the mind. It's a transcendent experience to witness it, but it can just as easily destroy you. And for what little time we have with these characters, it's easy to grow attached to them. Man, when Captain Kaneda died, I felt sad, and I don't know anything about him. Part of it is the amazing music, but I was rooting for these guys the whole way through, even Chris Evans' character, who's kind of a jerk but not evil. It's an incredibly simple yet effective story where the stakes are impossibly high and all the odds are stacked against this small ragtag group of people who are making the ultimate sacrifice. They know they aren't going to make it back home alive. Turning this into a fantasy story requires a change of scenery. Instead of space, this crew of adventurers must cross a vast barren desert with only a small caravan of supplies. Instead of firing a big bomb into the sun, these fantasy adventurers must instead find the exact location to perform what I'm calling a reignition ritual to appease the sun god and restore life to their land. It's a very similar adventure with similar stakes. There would have been a first group of adventurers that were sent on this quest who have not been heard back from. Along the way, this second group will stumble on the ruins of the first expedition's camp, where they will discover all the remains, and where they'll encounter the leader of the expedition who is still alive but has gone mad. Just like the crew from the original sci-fi version of the story, the fantasy adventurers are basically on a suicide mission. They know that once they complete the ritual, the rays of the reignited sun will destroy all of them. But if they don't complete the quest, all of humanity will die. Just like the original, it's a story about sacrifice. In terms of visuals, the team of adventurers will be dressed for travel in the desert, and will of course need dark goggles to shield their eyes. I wanted to make use of the gold color of the spacesuits in the original, so I used it as an accent color on the clothing and goggles. I also imagined their caravan being driven by camels, because obviously it's a desert. I also had fantasy Cillian Murphy holding a staff with a sundial on it. I thought it'd be cool for it to double as a compass somehow, I don't know. It'd be a way for him to navigate the party towards the ritual site while utilizing the sun motif. So throughout this project and the video I did before about changing fantasy movies into sci-fi movies, I've been seeing how these genres overlap a lot. Even though they tend to have different aesthetics and goals, sci-fi and fantasy stories both function well as examinations of the human condition, and both speculate on how society would operate under different circumstances. So there you have it. Thanks for watching, or listening, or both. Leave a comment below, like and subscribe, or don't. Live life as you choose.